because it can be, ooh,
That's
is
fine.
that
Go.
a threat or a promise recording process? Um, at the state level, it sometimes can feel a little bit laissez-faire, though I know recently things have been getting more, let's just say, directed. So I have a lot of questions about how that, I guess, relates to federal grant money and how that starts to trickle in through this next year and how we get work as a firm.
It's very interesting. So you pretty much said something, national policies. And when I think of national perspective, I think of Sheinya. Sheinya as the president of the National Emerging Urbanist Group. Tell me more about what you guys have planned or what we have planned, but what you're spearheading in terms of getting these emerging new urbanists involved. I know there's some events that you guys have going on pretty soon next month, in a bunch of different areas throughout the country. Can you touch on why you decided to be the push behind ENU? Obviously, after Kyle and Spencer were the founders, and so many other people who kind of paved the way in that regard. But now that you have the leadership, what is it that you're focused on? Tell us more about what you have going on.
Sure. I think to answer your initial question as to why I got into this, Emerging New Urbanists started off as a community for emerging professionals. And oftentimes, when you come out of school or are still in school and jump into the field, it can be very daunting to be around some very seasoned professionals that know what they're doing or they've been in the field for over 30 years. And so realizing that ENU started off as a safe space for people, as an introduction to new urbanism, it really empowered me to come and see how much further I can push the boundaries and what we do as emerging professionals, how to elevate our understanding, and also how to bridge the gap between us and the seasoned professionals, because eventually the torch will be passed on to us and we're going to have to be the ones to carry it on and push it further. And I guess this is what this entire panel is about. But
Yeah.
to talk about ENU specifically, we have so many events going on, which I will share some of them, but I will also drop our website into the chat for those that are interested in joining. I will say membership is free, so you don't have to worry about, having to pay a fee to become a member. And that's something that we intentionally do to lower the barriers of entry for emerging professionals. But so ENU, we are a group of emerging professionals that empower each other. And so we provide mentorship opportunities, networking, education to help new voices shape the future of new urbanism. And so, for an example, we have what is called urban decodes, which, if you've been with us for a long time, they were previously known as place summits. And so we call it urban decode because we think, what is a better experience than to go into a neighborhood that you're unfamiliar with and then decode the urbanism, right? So you look at what works, what doesn't work, what could be improved on. And this isn't only from a new urbanist lens, but also from an architecture perspective. Like, I my bachelor's was in architecture, not in urban design, but I kind of got into that and fell in love with it. And along the way, I've realized that urban design and urbanism doesn't only stop at engineers and urban designers. It's something that is psychologically something that we respond to, and neurologically, we're tied to it, right? You walk down a city that is walkable, that has, ample sidewalk space or trees, like you feel good about it versus, if you're walking on a narrow path with 5 lanes next to you and cars are speeding down the highway. So there's a human connection to it, not just a trained professional connection to it. We also facilitate career growth. We have opportunities on our websites, whether it's summer studios or job opportunities that other firms will reach out and ask to market. And so that's a way that other emerging professionals can reach out and connect, and find their pathway as well. And I would say one of my favorite initiatives that we have is our ENU Exchange. And so that's where we allow other emerging professionals to write articles about whatever they desire. And in doing so, we empower each other to elevate our writing, elevate our voices, understand the connection between writing and urban design and architecture. And I think all of that is important. We do book clubs that, we dissect the key points and see how does it apply today or how does it no longer apply today. And sometimes those are very tough and sensitive conversations to have, but we need to have them. So we provide that platform. And so, yeah, overall, we seek to bridge the gap between emerging professionals and seasoned professionals. Yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was
All right.
great. I do really respect what you guys have going on, or what we have going on at the national scale, just because I know how much it takes with CNU Florida Young Leaders. There's when I started thinking, all right, how do we take this more than just Miami, or how do we get more people involved in Orlando? And for you guys to focus on, the entire country, I think that's very commendable. I love the decode events that you guys have going on. Can you just um so I know it's Miami, Atlanta. What are the other cities that
Sure.
you guys are having the events at?
Sure. So our urban decodes run in the spring and in the fall to accommodate the
Mhm.
different weather types across the country. And so we do them simultaneously at the same time in different cities to allow other people that, may not be able to fly all the way to the East Coast and allow that community to be formed in that specific region. So coming up in March 8th and 9th, we're having our decodes in Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and Miami. All of that information is on our social media page. It's on our Instagram, it's on our LinkedIn. Add us, follow us if you don't have that. And then our fall typically falls in Chicago in the colder climates that probably wouldn't be ready to happen in the spring. And then along the way throughout the year, we'll have project urban decode. So for an example, last fall, we went to cul-de-sac in Tempe, Arizona,
Mm.
which for those that don't know, that's the first US car-free city that's built from scratch. And so Ian, you had a chance to host an event with Opticos Design, who were the designers behind the project. We invited the developer who also came in and gave us a talk and a tour, and we decoded the project. We had an interactive workshop throughout the decode in order to allow hands-on learning and not just, a lecture style event.
Yeah,
And yeah, it was really it was good. It was a good time. So I encourage
that's
you to
awesome.
look out in your city for decodes and also reach out to us if you notice that your city is not in one of our regions, because we will definitely work out a way to make it happen.
That's awesome. So I'm gonna touch on Matthew and Eric, and I want to have everybody say something at first, but then we're kind of gonna go and pick randomly, and I encourage everyone to drop some questions in the chat, so we can get it going. Matthew, tell me a little bit more about what you do at Torti Gallas, because I know you guys are focused on different markets across the United States. We talked about, what you're doing over there in DC. You're also doing some things in Florida. Tell me more about your perspective as somebody who's focused on different markets.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, getting to work at Torti Gallas does give me some perspective on a lot of different markets. My individual experience has been mostly in Florida, actually, and around the Tampa area, and then some local to DC and some in Chicago as well. And just to tie it back into a little bit of like what keeps you up at night, what I seem to see when I'm working with developer clients or landowners who are nervous to sort of break away from the typical sort of zoning horizontal development that they've done in the past is just what needs to sort of happen to create a change is sort of extreme sometimes for these developers. The product and the asset needs to almost completely fail for them to reassess. And a bulk of my work has been working on dead malls. And so when a shopping mall or a strip center uh, can't find new leases, is 40% empty, there's a lot less foot traffic going on, and they're actually losing money on it, that's when not just the mall owner, but the box stores who have contracts for 30, sometimes 50 years on these mall properties are finally willing to start to consider a new form. And so, what I think new urbanism is so important and crucial for us to be paying attention to and learning about is that moment when sort of, it's not just the malls, but I think of a day where it kind of all starts to happen at once, and it'll be a very quick and, you know, emergency-like need for walkable, transit-oriented design. And so what we're doing is just trying to help clients who are already seeing sort of either the climate change aspect of that, the economic aspect of that, but just setting up either existing sprawl or infill projects for a better future. And that also requires understanding all aspects of a community and a neighborhood. So we're not just specialized in multifamily. We're also trying to do retail. We're doing office. We're doing hospitality, and being able to speak the economic side of things to the developer has been really important for getting some of the innovative ideas of development into these projects, rather than just doing the same thing that we've done for quite some time with some of these older developers.
That's awesome. I'm definitely gonna double click on a lot of things that you just mentioned after have Eric speak. So Eric, you are the treasurer for CNU Florida. I know that you have a lot of experience professionally working on a recently awarded zoning code or master plan that I want you to talk about a little bit more. But now you're doing something very special and near and dear to your heart because you're back in your hometown of Tallahassee, right? So I just kind of want you to just tell us about your experience and being involved with all your your professional accolades.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Eric. I'm the principal urban designer for the city of Tallahassee now. Previously with Dover Colin Partners, and yeah, I mean, during my time there, was very thankful to be able to participate in some of the recent projects that they've done that have been awarded some number of awards, including the citywide zoning code update for the city of Kingston, received a CNU Charter Award, and the Smart Growth America Center for Zoning Solutions Form-Based Code Award for last year. And yeah, super huge honor there, and super thankful to be able to like take some of these lessons, having learned them, applying them across the country, and come to a city that did not necessarily, like in many cases, working with a firm or a number of consulting capacities, communities, there's a desire for change, and they're asking you to come to the city, to the community, to participate in it. But in most cases across the country, that's not necessarily the case. You kind of have to create that drive for improvement, or at least identify where it exists, and foster the understanding and kind of building capacity locally, identifying your local advocates and working with them to equip them to pursue some of these best practices that we see taking shape across the country. So yeah, excited to kind of play that role here in Tallahassee a little bit, and work with the state CNU chapter here, and kind of looking at brainstorming ways to bring best practices to the state level as well.
You guys recently had an event up there as well, correct? Tell me a little bit more about that event. It was like you guys were drawing or something, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah, we have our own local subchapter for CNU up here in Tallahassee. And yeah, it's just a fun kind of way to get out there. And so we called it we're calling the event series Sketch the Town, and we're just meeting up in kind of locations all around town, and in front of historic buildings and parks, and bars around town, just kind of hanging out, networking, and sketching what's going on around us, and just kind of appreciating the built environment more. And that's really it's a great networking tool, because you have the conversations you have like while you're doing that it's super key, and really important to building momentum for change into the future.
So I actually have a friend who's from Miami that lives in Tallahassee. I was trying to get her to go.
Miami.
and I was telling her, hey, it's like painting with a twist over here in Miami when you're painting with wine, but over there we're gonna make it about new urbanism and professional connection. But now I kind of want to switch it up and ask Chris something that we were discussing recently about maybe something or a buzzword that's overhyped or a myth, right? So I want you to jump in and tell me what is it about what we talked about recently that you think is a myth or may not be a myth?
Sure. So we were discussing this when we were thinking about topics for the call.
Hmm.
The idea of self-sustaining cities. It's one that's been prevalent in the literature of landscape urbanism and landscape architecture for a long time. The idea that cities can be totally self-sustaining. And then this idea has also merged with the idea of a quarter-mile walk shed and 15-minute cities to produce this kind of like microcosm in which you think that you can have everything that you need for daily living, including, as Jaime Correa, one of our mentors, would say, food production. It's very, very difficult at the scale of a city, and it's something that we're always thinking of as a possibility. But lately, I've been starting to think of it more as a myth. If you think of traditional, let's say like Italian hill towns, the city is very well defined. And I think this is something that new urbanism actually learns a lot from and takes a lot from, is understanding that the city should be a place for urbanism of the highest order. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, yes, you should have public space, yes, you should have park space, but that the city generally stays as city and separates itself from the agrarian landscape surrounding it. And generally, that's for two reasons. One, it's for efficiency's sake and reduce of the potential for sprawl. And the second is just purely, I would say, economic, in saying that it's very difficult to produce all of your own food for a specific population. Each person needs like, almost a full acre. And if you think that we're going to plant every single facade in an entire city, then you must not have a water bill.
That's a good point. Andrew, I know I know your mind is pretty much like deeper than the ocean. I remember one time I first of all, you gave me your book. If you guys haven't checked out Delirious Miami by Andrew Clum, I definitely recommend it. It's I'll let you talk about it, but tell me about how you have all these things going on, but you're still able to work on your own publishing company called Underwater Publishing. Um, Tell me about what interests you most about getting the word out about these kinds of things, with your publishing company.
Yeah. Wow. Maybe the best way to connect it is with a tangent, which Chris was talking about efficiency in cities and how we allocate land and resources. And the last thing I could tag onto that is you could plant a lot of plants in an urban way, but you need a lot of fossil fuel based fertilizer to do that. So that's another one of those trade-offs. Like, yeah, you can have a lot of flower pots, but most of those urban plants that we could buy at the store, they have soils that are subsidized in a huge way by fossil fuel based phosphorus and other things. That connects in a terrible, this is just how my mind works, connects to publishing, because currently working on a cookbook actually that came out of a course. I can actually, Chris and I are in our office. Might as well use this to our advantage.
Yeah.
There was a book that was recently published that I worked on with some friends in school called The Green Revolution Cookbook. And in this book, we looked at alternative food sources. So you think about alternative grains like sorghum or millet, and thinking about how to center those in our cooking and food culture. And just writing one chapter in that made me fall down this rabbit hole of old family recipes. And now I'm working on a cookbook that has 50 recipes in it. And because everything is so connected and there's so much to learn, and this is Chris and my passion is just constant, never-ending learning. We need this publishing company because otherwise, my mind is not going to be able to have that outlet of all these different projects that we do. So we are doing cookbooks. We're doing books that would belong more in high academia about the future of urbanism. We're working on everything in between. So that's a little summary of our publishing company.
Including a
Got it.
children's book. Urbanism is for everyone, including those who don't know that much about urbanism and just, want to cook a meal, maybe something that they can source from a backyard garden.
That's a good point. So this question is for Sheinya and Matthew. So I want whoever wants to answer first. If you guys could change one law as it relates to urbanism in the United States, and it would impact every single city, what would it be? Matthew, go first.
Just something that's on my mind right now in terms of the law is the requirement against sort of single stair buildings. CNU DC is working on a contest right now to allow single stair buildings in Baltimore and see what kind of ideas that the architects that participate in the competition are willing to come up with, if it can help with affordability and walkability and just allowing more spaces in our city to be utilized with single stair. So yeah, just sort of something that's on my mind that I think could be helpful in providing more housing options.
What do you think, Sheinya?
For me, I would say for accessory dwelling units to be able to be built in single family zoning districts. I'm from Massachusetts originally, and recently, earlier this month, actually, they just passed that by right now, ADUs can be built in single family zoning. So that's a win for Massachusetts, but that's what I would do across the United States.
That's a good point. ADUs are a great way to add more units and especially attack the affordability crisis. Eric Pate, I know that you've dealt with many different charrettes, in your career. I'm wondering what's the worst take you ever heard? If something jumps to mind, like what's the worst take you've ever heard in one of those charrettes?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I can point to one take in particular. But yeah, there's lots of general negativity when it comes to walkable urbanism and just walkable neighborhoods in general. But yeah,
Just give me an example. I know I'm putting you
Yeah.
on the spot, but give me an example of something that you heard. Maybe, hey, we need 10 more parking garages or something. I don't know.
I mean, I guess one thing that comes to mind, someone said a water park, and should be put in a neighborhood, and it's like, man, that's not like the worst take, but it's an odd out there take, and yeah, people, people will come to the table with like ideas like that seem outside the box. I think it's our role to kind of look to the what's the underlying thing that they're getting at. And I think that's kind of like a responsibility we have as planners to kind of see through, the surface level comments and feedback we get from people and look at some of the underlying issues and kind of relating with people,
Good point. Okay, so this is for Andrew and Chris. When you guys were working on your project in Texas, right? You pretty much had a blank canvas. What is something, obviously, if it's not confidential that you guys can talk about, what is something that in this plan you made sure that even if the developer wasn't really on board with it, you were going to, sneak in there somehow?
A water park. And I make sure to say that at every public charrette I go to.
What do you think, Chris?
That's a tough question. I honestly, as designers, and even as, planners, urban designers, et cetera, I think that we have a responsibility to not just our public, but also our clients. And I genuinely don't think that we've ever tried to like hide something in the plan, or try to do something without their full consent and knowledge. Because at the end of the day, um, there used to be on the site a large runway. And if you were to fly a plane over it and use that runway, he'd be able to see every mistake urbanistically that someone would make from the sky. So I feel like it's really hard to put Easter eggs in there, and we're still early on in the process, where I'm sure if there's an inside joke, we will slip it in there somewhere, but definitely not at the expense of either the public or the client. One of the interesting things that I want to piggyback off of from the last comment was when engaging the public, I think that there's a way to be able to speak genuinely with people and understand their priorities without having to sneak things in. For instance, I mean, we were doing a project up in Vermont, which was another master plan and downtown plan. And the people there, they kept just talking about the quality of the street and the quality of sidewalks. And that was at like the forefront of their minds was, okay, well, how do we fix the sidewalk? And in reality, you can interpret that as, walkability has many components, a sidewalk only being part of it. A lot of it had to do with this frontage is what makes me uncomfortable, or the speed of the cars, or the design of the street. But in their mind, it was the sidewalk that felt unsafe. So you have to address those concerns and make them feel comfortable and try to put everything out there for them to think of, because oftentimes, people come at it with like a narrow sense of what their own experience might be. And that's our job, as Eric said, to be able to translate for clients and the general public.
Got it. So I'm gonna say a little story. So one day I was having a conversation with Liz Plater-Zybrook, who is joining us right now. And I was recording it because I wanted to send it and show it to everybody on this podcasting that I had going on back in the day. And I remember asking her, hey, what if there's something like a Miami-Dade 21? Instead of Miami 21, which is the city of Miami zoning code, what if we do something like the Miami-Dade 21, right? And she pretty much was like, there's over 30 municipalities in the county. Like, that's not really how it works. And then years later, the Live Local Act came out and said, hey, out of all you 400 cities, you're going to have to pay attention to me because I'm the big bad state, right? But I'm actually a fan, even though it's not perfect, I'm a fan of the Live Local Act because it's kind of pushing the boundary and pushing cities to have their own response, right? It's like, all right, if you don't agree with the Live Local Act, what is your own local response? So I want to ask you guys, what is something along those lines that can be maybe impacted or applied in the nation that might have a similar effect? Obviously, there's no one size fits all answer to all of our urban problems, but I'm wondering what you guys have in mind as the future of new urbanism.
Yeah, I'll jump in quick with just a reference to I think the Florida Wildlife Corridor is a huge asset that we have here in Florida. And it's also a great model for the rest of the country. And there's a number of other states that are doing similar efforts here with the ultimate goal of connecting statewide wildlife corridors across the country. It's essentially a statewide, natural, transect zone. I mean, it's T1 statewide there, and that's kind of the starting point. And it's the process and the methodology behind the wildlife corridor can be replicated. County by county, community by community, and that's, I think, such a cool resource that we I don't think have fully appreciated as planners, and and the CNU have fully appreciated how important of an asset that is.
It's a good
Maybe
point. Go ahead, Andrew.
I'll just jump in with a quote from Denzel Washington, which is, you can't legislate love. Uh,
Oof.
and maybe something along the lines of you can't legislate people into doing the right thing, you know? Like Andres, maybe I'd push back because I know you love pushback.
Yeah, yeah.
On the live local, in many ways it's from my limited point of view, um, punched a hole in some really well-written form-based codes in Florida, specifically like Miami.
Yeah.
Maybe the intentions of that aren't able to be carried through anymore. The other side of that argument is that it at least elicits a response from all the municipalities and they get their butts into action. Antagonism can be great to getting people to actually care. But at the end of the day, you're not going to get people to care through legislation.
So how do you think you can get people to care?
Social. It's got to be a social movement like this call, like what we're doing here.
That's a
We
good
need to get
point.
people active enough that they care enough to talk to each other or talk publicly.
I'll jump in here in sort of direct contradiction to Andrew's point that I think a lot of times within the urban design conversations, we focus on the design planning and not so much implementation, but like the design philosophy. But perhaps if we have more local groups that focus on the legislation, then things can actually get done, or there could be more pushback towards bad legislation. And I think ultimately we can do all that we want to do because it feels good socially, but if it's not written down anywhere or enforced anywhere, I mean, it's, in my opinion, not going to happen.
Yeah, back in you up there, Sheinya, with that approach, I mean, like policy, influencing policy, I think is the next, and not next. I mean, CNU has been very active in advocating for policy for a long time, but I think as far as implementing the blueprint, kind of theme with this conversation, I mean, continuing to do so even more so is I think critical for the future of new urbanism. Looking at as we're seeing increased amounts of rainfall across the country and in the southeast, our on-site stormwater standards are not conducive to the level of walkable infill development that we need to see in our communities. Building code issues, as Matt, you alluded to, single stair reforms, sprinklers for missing middle, and even fire code stuff when it comes to allowing a path forward to access, for reducing requirements around alleys and that kind of thing. I mean, communities are trying to implement new urbanism, but some larger policy conversations that are not being had in many corners of the development world that we need to have and need to continue having and have more of.
Hey,
Yeah.
so Matt,
But,
I know you want to jump in and I want to hear your thoughts, but while Liz is on here, I would love for her to speak on this if possible. Can we unmute her, please?
I can unmute myself.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So what do you think? What do you think of the Live Local? How does that apply at the national scale? How can we push the boundaries even further? And we're so happy to have your support here in Florida and across the country with the emerging urbanists. What would you challenge us to do? What can we do to continue pushing the bar?
I have complex and fragmented thoughts about this. One is and by the way, it's all complicated by the recent article in the Federalist that's gone out on some of the listservs with a lot of untruths about our movement. But I thought Live Local was in fact a very clever response at the state level to say, let's address this in some really actionable way. Somebody very smart got up there and got involved in doing that. By the way, I think Cesar Garcia Pons knows a lot about it and could talk to you more about it.
Okay.
But it's also a kind of preemptive move that was carried out more locally on North Wynwood after Plus Urbia did an incredible job on trying to encourage small infill building of the more affordable private investment type in the North Wynwood neighborhood. And Plus Urbia has Juan Mulleret has an incredible presentation on the density of small apartment buildings versus high rises and so on. You all might enjoy seeing that at some point. He gave it in my zoning class. And, a lot of people worked on that. The whole neighborhood, apparently, maybe Savannah knows more about it. But, and then apparently, according to Juan, a city commissioner came around and with the kind of live local as the wind at her back said, no, if you're going to do affordable, you can do anything, which took the kind of, didn't understand essentially what was being done there and how useful it would be if it had succeeded, and just said, because by the way, Juan's approach was to limit lot size, so you couldn't have more than 100 foot width, I think. Therefore, aggregation and, waiting for the big building, which is what happens in Miami, isn't what would be happening there. But by saying anything goes, as long as it has an affordable component, I'm broadly generalizing. Then you take the wind out of that, the sails of that effort. And maybe that's what I kind of, you were talking about the small building earlier. The small increment of infill. And I have another story about that, but I think that would, because we're trying to do one in Little Havana.
Okay.
And I think that may be more the answer than the ADU, which the ADU relies on the single owner to, have the get up and go to do it. And actually their garage is already functioning that way, right?
Yeah.
But figuring out how to clear the route for the small builder, such as Juan was trying to do, and such as and John Anderson's been urging us all to do, I think is worth looking at. And we came up with one thing that would, at the federal level, facilitate that. But of course, this is an ADA, accessibility issue, because right now you have to provide accessibility with 4 units or more. You have to have at least one accessible unit by FHA standards, apparently. And that collides with density and parking requirements locally. So the big question is, do you loosen it at the federal level and not have the local fight? Because at the federal level right now, they seem to be quite willing to let things go. Or do you have the local fight about parking and density? That may be all too abstract for this.
No, that was great. Thank you, Liz. I'm gonna point out Savannah so she can touch on this, because I know she's with the city of Miami. But before you go on, Savannah, I love what you mentioned, Liz, about the neighborhood revitalization district 2 for Wynwood Norte. I remember one of my first feasibility studies that I did was on Northwest 36th Street for an owner who purchased his property in 1996 for $300,000, and because of the NRD2, his property ended up selling at $8 million a couple of years ago. So there's tremendous value economically, but also, urbanistically in these kind of districts. So I wonder if maybe we should respond to the state with more of these districts, And if you could please connect us with Juan, I would love to have something with the ENU and with the young leaders so he can talk more about what he
Yeah.
did and what you just mentioned. I think would be great.
I'll send you his email. I'm sure he'd be happy to join you.
Awesome. I'm gonna say that you told me. Thank you, Liz. Appreciate it. Savan, go ahead. Chime in, please.
So we have lots of, I think if you ever watch the city commission agenda at the city of Miami, you see that we're constantly updating Miami 21. Probably faster than we would like to update it sometimes, but they are fast and furious updates. So we do have ADU legislation that's coming forward, that's going to be on the city commission agenda. I believe it's there now. So starting tomorrow, it'll be there to legalize ADUs in Miami. I think Liz alluded to the fact that we have a lot of ADUs existing in garages already. So we're looking to legalize those and then allow them for everybody living in our single family neighborhoods. We also have some updates coming to the NRD2, which is the Wynwood Norte district. Those have passed the Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board and are on their way to City Commission as well. We also have some updates to Miami 21 that will be coming in response to the Live Local, and that's kind of what I wanted to chime in about. It's specifically at setbacks in terms of how our T4s abut our T5s and T6 transects. Because what we've been finding is that we have about 30 Live Local projects that are in for permitting. And some of those are coming up with significant issues with setbacks when they have a T4 that abuts the T5 and the T6. So we've been trying to work through that on how that might play out before it gets to a state level and we just get superseded by the state. Excuse me, guys, I'm recovering from a little bit of a cold. So we are kind of working through those issues currently, and you'll see some of that legislation come up within the next few months, relatively quickly at the city commission. I think in terms of Live Local, one of the biggest things, the two biggest pushbacks that we get are in terms of height. People don't like the height, and then B, people don't like the density, right? In neighborhoods like Wynwood Norte and Wynwood, where they have really great revitalization districts and they have neighborhood plans, the Live Local is really counterintuitive to what they've decided as a neighborhood they want to be. And so that's always a little concerning to me, is that they have kind of that neighborhood vision. They've kind of thought through what increased density would look like in those neighborhoods. And of course, now we're going to start seeing 32-story tall buildings in Wynwood, which is never what it was designed or intended to be. I think in some places, that height and that density is okay. And I think, we all know that you can have a lot of density in small buildings. So the issue kind of with Live Local from a land use regulation to me is less about the density and sometimes more about the height because of how that impacts the character of the neighborhood. In terms of density, I came from a state that was not a growth management state, and Florida is a growth management state. And so we're required to do a lot of concurrencies. And this will really depend on municipality to municipality and how they're handling it across the nation. But when we look at expanding density that quickly without doing any concurrency, I think to Eric's point, it puts a lot of pressure on our infrastructure, such as stormwater. Like, are we really ready as a city to have a whole bunch of paved areas that are not ready for that density and that amount of payment in terms of our stormwater? But even more importantly, are we ready, and going beyond traffic even, are we ready for that density and the pressure that puts on like our water filtration systems and garbage pickup and things like that? So from a municipality standpoint, I'm sometimes looking at those types of things in terms of concurrency. And of course, everybody has to do concurrency at some point. So of course, if you're looking at school concurrency, you get stopped in terms of Live Local building permit. So you get stopped at at that stuff type at building permit in some places, but in smaller municipalities across the nation, you don't. And they also don't have the funding or the money to really put into their infrastructure. And so it creates a little bit of an issue for them. So it really just depends, I think, kind of looking at, if you're looking at live local nationally versus, where we are in Florida, that growth management is kind of like a piece that as incremental developers we forget about, but is also important to managing the municipal side of our citizen or the services that we provide our citizens.
All right. I also want to thank you, Savan, for helping our group. I remember you even hooked one of us up with an internship, and Jaime went on to really enjoy that. So your efforts are appreciated, and we need more Savans out there. So
And
really appreciate it.
We have internships open right now. You can go to miamigov.com and apply. We're currently conducting interviews. So I would say go ahead and apply. Sometimes we end up with additional funding. And so we can do another, like, for example, if we do a summer one, we might have time for a fall one as well, depending on how everything shakes out. So if you're looking for an internship opportunity, definitely go to miami.gov and apply. We have I was going to say we just closed a position, but our chief of urban design will also be open in a couple of weeks. For those that don't know, Graham Jones, who was the previous chief of urban design, has been promoted to assistant director.
Nice.
So we'll also have a chief of urban design open. So be on the lookout to join the city of Miami team.
Nice. Well, thank you very much, Savan. Encourage all you guys to continue being involved. And I know we have some people here representing different municipalities and counties. So I think it's very interesting. Matt, I didn't forget about you. Jump in, man. I know you have very interesting thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's no worries. Go sort of pale in comparison to the insights that we just received. But just sort of backing up Sheinya and Eric's comments about supporting legislation and policies that help enable new urbanist development and affordability and housing. One of the things that came to my mind, something I talked to Andrew about while doing some research about development in Vermont, is Homes for All, Housing for All toolkit that they have there. Basically, it's a policy that enables smaller developers or bigger developers that are looking to do missing middle housing, that at least in Burlington, I'm not sure if it was everywhere in Vermont, but they would supply 30% of the funding to make that happen. And for smaller developers who don't want to hire an architect or don't want to worry about the approval process, they have pre-approved plans for missing middle types that you could use, which I found to be interesting. But I think that there is funding there. We've seen our country print trillions of dollars recently for different reasons, and so just a choice from our legislators to make policy that helps enable good affordable development rather than making it more difficult.
Got it. So thank you, Matt. I don't want to make this all about Live Local, but I do want to shout out Eliza, who's one of the pioneers behind this this youth movement, I guess, if you will, when it comes to the new urbanism. She has a comment and she states, Live Local generally punishes jurisdictions that have increased height or density somewhere and rewards jurisdictions that have no centers with higher height and density. So I think that's very interesting. I'm not going to say his name because I know he's going to get embarrassed, but I want to say something that I know somebody here watching is very interested in, and I want to hear what our panelists have to say and whoever would like to jump in. I think it's very interesting. He was pretty much an apprentice to one of the most famous incremental neighborhoods that have been built. And this was Starkville, Mississippi. Forgetting the exact name, but the gentleman was Mr. Dan Camp. May he rest in peace. But his apprentice, I've learned a ton from him. We created a relationship. I consider him a really good friend. And he pretty much has a dream of bringing back people being able to build their own homes, right? I want to hear what you guys think about this, and even Liz at the end, if you would like to say something as it relates to this. What do you guys think? Will there ever be a time, either in the near future or maybe now? I know Andres Duani is working on the no nonsense housing thing, and these are innovative building solutions that can be built with two people. But what do you guys think? Is there any way that we would be able to build our own homes? Andrew, Chris, Sheinya, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, as an architect who loves working with my hands, I get excited for that. And there's certain programs like Habitat for Humanity where people who have no building expertise can actually get involved with that. But I think the more that we can do to bring back the kind of barn raising culture or the culture of individuals being involved and therefore much more emotionally invested in the places that they're living. And we should be able to build our own water parks too.
Yeah, and there's like, it's interesting. I think we've barely scratched the surface of the potential of pattern books and their ability to, I think lots of the majority of obstacles to, building your own home or just having a more active role in your built environment are, at a policy level, and having kind of a regional approach to pre-approved, building plans and pattern books that meet the needs of a local region, and Florida be wind resistant, approach to wind resistant building types there, and in California fire ready building types. The Foothill catalog I think recently got highlighted by CNU Public Square, but looking at how those could be brought in, and also exploring modular building typologies and that approach to things. I mean, I think like that's the future of how we can democratize building to a certain extent. And yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating topic for sure.
I also want to say, please jump in and write things on the chat. You can input your thoughts. Please do so. Go ahead, Matthew, Sheni. I want to hear your thoughts. Can we build our own homes?
Yeah, I was gonna bring up the Foothill catalog as well. I didn't realize it had been highlighted already, but that's great. But yeah, in sort of revitalizing situations, again going back to my theme of like, I think some of these themes that we're worried about might happen all at once when it's more of a state of emergency, and so that is sort of a perfect example. And hopefully, that it can sort of pan out for them. I know part of their process is right now just getting the catalog sort of designed and figured out. And then you have to get those plans approved, and then it can sort of become something that is used to rebuild the community, right? And so even along the lines with the Vermont Housing for All that I brought up earlier, they have pre-approved plans. Is there a way to enable people go one step further from what they've already done, which I think is great, and enable people to build those easier themselves or literally themselves? Yeah, so I'm all for it. And again, I think it's something that our markets right now are not necessarily supporting the same way a Sears catalog was back in the day. But it's something that we need to be prepared for. I think it can happen quickly in a time of disaster.
Like the Katrina cottages.
Yeah, another great example.
Shania, what do you got?
I think I'm torn with this question. Part of me wants to say no, because I value, sort of cohesiveness in terms of developing more, I don't even know how to put this, more sound communities or better designs in general. Like, I don't want people messing that up. But I guess is coming from catalogs or pre-approved plans, that's something, that's sort of different. And in that regard, I do think there's a pathway for that. And again, with natural disaster relief and Habitat for Humanity, like we're already seeing foundations and grassroots. And I think it's up to us as emerging professionals to expand more upon that and look at what future challenges there may be or what future pathways there can be. So,
It's very interesting. So I guess I could spice it up right now because you just reminded me of something, Sheinya. I want everyone to jump in here. What do you guys wait, but before I go on, I kind of wanted to talk about the whole process, respecting structure and order, and kind of just being tactical about it, and tactical urbanism, the approach of quick build, let's get it done, let's move forward. And I know that both sides have great things, but before we move on to that, Liz, can you please chime in? I know that you just wrote Small House, Small Builders, Capitol Street in Charleston, South Carolina. What do you think about us being able to build our own homes?
Well, the Capitol Street, if you don't know it, is worth a visit next time you're in South Carolina, in Charleston. And it's a group of people who, architects who started building very small footprint houses on a property that somehow they could just jam them all together. And Andrew Gould, I think, is the name of the leader of the pack. And Vince Graham from Ion eventually got involved, I think, to build a couple of them. And now he's building those kinds of small infill houses. But I think it's a kind of model of freestanding one at a time in an urban setting. But the key is that the land was probably not too expensive, and they must have gotten some release from the regulatory framework. And, I'm fascinated by the online discussion about, is it supply and demand for housing, or is this an almost hopeless case of international investment in real estate, in the land? Is it the building or is it the land? And in Miami, it's the land. In other parts of the country, it may not be, and there's more opportunity then to work with a building, the building technology, such as you were mentioning. And you mentioned, Andrés, is no nonsense. With a Canadian developer, they put up a log house on the mall this summer that may not, I don't know how it would work with a wind code. We didn't test it for that, but would certainly work in other places. And that went up very quickly. And they're beautiful. I mean, it's worth taking a look at that. They're square logs.
Yeah, they're very nice. Actually, I spoke with Fernando, Fernando, about it, and he's like, look, they're beautiful, and we just did it right now. So I think
it went up in a matter of days. It was like 2 days of construction. But anyway, so I think we're hearing about Vermont, I think, or New Hampshire in this conversation, and I presume that that's a very different kind of land cost structure than what we've generated down here. Rob Studeville once said, you can buy a perfectly beautiful house for $30,000 in Aurora, New York, where the main job is the jail.
Yeah.
Liz, when I was asking some of the other professors at about our design build program, when I was at the GSD, we did interviews with a number of different professionals and professors and practicing architects. And one of the interviews that we did was with a guy named Andrew Frear, who I'm not sure if you know his work. He runs the design build program at Auburn. And he does the $10,000 home in which for $10,000, they're able to produce these individual houses they have real clients. And they're executed all throughout this town. So now they've created I tried asking him about what are the implications of creating like an urbanism now that they've done so many, but they're mostly concerned with these as like small object buildings. I think that the concept though is still interesting, but one of the things that I think jumped out to me was that, again, to your point, it's much cheaper to build in Auburn because of the land. And that's why they're able to do this kind of self-build act. But I had one other thing that jumped to mind, which was I feel like a lot of people, whenever they say, "Oh, I'm going to build my own home," immediately people think that, architecture as a profession is under threat and they're devaluing architecture. But I think that there's something to be said for when you build your own home, you are going to respect the work of the architect that much more because
Oh yeah.
all of a sudden you'll become intimately involved in all the processes and understanding of all the components. Um, and then I had one other thing that came to mind, which was when we were talking about catalog books and implementing something like that at a much larger level. And I worry because when we talk about sprawl, one of the things that I feel like jumps out to me is the homogeneity of it all.
Hmm.
And part of the reason why we love cities is because they're diverse and engaging places. Part of that has to come from the fact of either different landowners or different buildings that have different expressions. Um, I mean, even Seaside is a great example of that. I remember when Andres gave us the tour of the different townhomes in which they were all styled completely differently. That kind of difference, I guess, in terms of facade and design, I think is actually a benefit to the idea of the city. So something to consider as we move towards more pattern books and more standards, I guess.
That's awesome. Thank you, Chris. Andrew, I know you're thinking of something.
My mind's buzzing, but I was hoping you get to the next question because I have too many thoughts.
All right, yeah, that is a great segue to the next question. What do you think is better, quick build or formal, you know, bureaucratic processes?
I'm selfish. So as an architect, I want more vernacular that I can mine. I want to see more diverse methods and forms of building pop up in the United States. Because one could argue that the building code has killed the vernacular in the United States. So without objectifying or trying to just put communities in a petri dish,
Mm-hmm.
I really admire the work that many of my colleagues are doing, studying informal settlements like Barranquilla in Colombia. There's just so many informal settlements around the world where it's fascinating. And most of the time, my favorite book to hand to freshman students that are just learning about placemaking or architecture is Bernard Rudofsky's Architecture Without Architects, because that has so much richness and so many things to learn because of that diversity. So I'm all for, selfishly, I want more people to do it because then it's more interesting for me to study.
It's a good point. Um, I think this is I want to mention this. My boy Chuck is on here, who is a developer from Africa and now has his eyes set on the United States. I don't want to say what state to give something away that maybe I shouldn't be. But we had a great conversation recently about, and this ties into Wynwood, but it ties into the coolness factor that makes these communities so valuable, right? And I would say that there's nobody cooler than us. So how do we decide what places are cool? This is for you, Matthew. What do you think about coolness and how it relates to these like very, very alive towns?
Yeah, coolness. I guess it's I guess I don't think about it too much as coolness. I think of it as a sense of place, right? Just that it has a uniqueness to it. And that the space is contained in some way, typically. You're walking through places that have things to look at. There's wayfinding and there's a mix of uses. And agreeing with sort of Andrew's point, when there's more vernacular, there's more sense of place and there's more of the coolness, I would say.
Guys, we're gonna wrap this up. But if you have anything you'd like to say, please either raise your hand, put it in the chat. We can call on you. Anything you'd like to say. I think just want to say we are very grateful for all of you joining us. And I know a lot of other people registered and they're not able to make it live, but we're gonna send this to them. Let me see. So Teodoro says, "Hi, my name's Teddy. I recently graduated from Miami. Curious to hear how transit fits into the conversation of housing and legislation and how we can support initiatives that help navigate our cities better." What do you guys think? How transit fits into the conversation of housing and legislation.
I'll say this quickly for the interest of time. It is directly related, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that ENU tries to focus on is that we have people of many different backgrounds within our organization for a reason. It's because there is a gap between those different industries when they all directly relate to each other. And like, for an example, our most recent book club was inclusive transportation, and we read through that, and that related to urban design and so on and so forth. And I believe we're either doing or going to do how to get killed by a traffic engineer, something like that. But those types of conversations and what we can do to support better is what we as ENU try to come together to brainstorm and to advocate for. So I don't have a direct answer to elaborate on for the interest of time, but join ENU.
Liz, yeah, I piggyback what she's saying. Sheinya is 100% right. I think the way you can get involved, Teodoro, is by connecting with ENU and maybe leading some kind of initiative and being a part of us, you know. So this is from Chuck, and this is to Liz. He said, "Hey guys, my name is Chuck. My question is mainly for Professor Liz. Do you think that autonomous mobility could reduce parking minimums in the future?"
Hopefully, aren't we all hoping for that, among other things? We've been working on a number of plans which look forward to that, where you may be able to remote park, have fewer vehicles. I think there's still a lot to be learned about this. Very interesting that when Uber came into being, traffic in Manhattan, for instance, was documented to increase incredibly because the circulation of vehicles looking for riders became an issue. But if they're driverless and they have a business plan that might set it up in such a way that they're not driving around looking for their riders, it could be very interesting. I think we need to scenario that in some ways in a kind of industrial, I don't know whether it's algorithms or just studying how systems like that would work in terms of time and money. And then after that, the most important thing is to make a place that tries it out. So yes, I think there's a lot of, we should all be thinking about other ways of having mobility.
Just to add the math to Liz's comment, so many of these companies, autonomous mobility startups, they're not thinking about this spatially. We should all keep in mind that a parked car takes up 180 square feet if it's at an 18 by 10 parking space, and a car that's going at 70 miles an hour that needs at least 5 car lengths of stopping distance behind it for the next car is taking up like 700 square feet of space. So the faster the car is moving, the more space it's taking up. And that's a spatial, that's math that we can't change.
One more thing I'd add to this conversation is just that besides it just taking up a lot of space, one thing that kind of makes me sad about an idea of a city that moves with autonomous cars is still the individualism that's created from that. And, you don't have a bus, you're not on the train, you're not walking in community, and it just promotes American individualism in the same way that a car with a driver has, in my opinion.
You know, it could be interesting to do a plan of some sort for, let's say, and use downtown Miami as an example.
Mm-hmm.
But Andres, didn't you have a fellow who had the freebie franchise
Yeah.
locally as part of this group? Because I always thought that was a driverless freebie, which, you know, a bunch of them in a row going down Flagler or going up Miami Avenue, or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so that it's there every 5 minutes and you just walk onto it almost like a cable car in San Francisco. And it's intended to get you, I suppose our overhead transit does that too, but you know, some real in design schools, we can scenario buildings and you can get costs from that. That transit has the additional aspect of trajectory and time to scenario. And so it's more complex, but it would really be worth doing those kinds of scenarios, much in the way that we do the design scenarios, you know, that are static. This is the moving scenario, the movement, the mobile scenarios.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that, but.
So how would you challenge us, Liz? Let's close it out with your remarks. How would you challenge us? I know you were interested when we last spoke about AI and how we're using AI, but now it's looking like China might take over the world with DeepSeek and all that. What do you think? What are your thoughts, Liz? How would you challenge us to take it to the next level?
Well, apparently DeepSeek will stop short of helping you when you use certain terms or ask for certain things. I think, first of all, that the variety of locations, I think geography is really important. It's important in planning for adaptation, which is what I'm teaching right now. But also, you know, the difference between Vermont and South Florida in terms of costs, needs, and culture mean that everybody in their own place, I think, needs to figure out what are things we need to know more about and how can we scenario them out. You know, nobody can think about, can project how things could be with great veracity the way designers and planners and engineers can, you know, in which you just project it out and see how it works. You know, you're testing it in a sense, and everybody has something in their region that they could probably look at in that way. There's a beautiful set of drawings for raising the street of Brickell Bay, this little curved part of downtown Miami where there's a street front on the bay instead of building backs that SWA did. And, you know, there's two scenarios of how to do that. They presented in public, and it's that kind of, you know, here's different ways of doing it. Instead of just talking about it, there's an incredible number of groups that just talk about, let's say, climate change, what needs to be done, or housing, you know, what's the problem? But the projection of possible responses, there's not always solutions, but responses is something that the people in this group can do. And
action.
And you tend to forget that other people can't do that, don't have the training or the insight or the interest. And so it's really worth running the experiments.
It's a great point. I think it's the alignment, how you said, of interest, skills, the team, the opportunity, and timing. I think it's on us to take action. So thank you all once again for joining us. Thank you all to especially our panelists. Thank you, Liz and Dover Cole. They were huge pioneers behind renderings and showing the before and after of these kinds of things. So I think it'll be cool to see who's next, you know, who else is gonna continue pushing the bar. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll do this again very soon. I'm glad to have a good turnout. So talk to you guys very soon. Really thankful for all of you joining us. Have a good night.
Thank
Good evening.
you.
Everyone, thank you,
Thank you
Andres.
for organizing, Andres.
Yeah. Let's do it.